Hello everyone and welcome to another Milky Way processing tutorial. I've had lately a few requests to make a few more tutorials, and what I've decided to do is I created this image recently, and this was the final image, as you can see here on Photoshop. And what we're going to do is go step by step through everything I did to create this image. This will involve stacking for noise reduction, stacking also to remove artifacts from the sky. We will be blending a foreground with the sky, some slight color grading, and a few little tricks that I use to make the Milky Way pop in the sky, and also the foreground to stand out a bit. So we will begin in Lightroom today, and I've prepared my images already. I've got around 5 foreground images, and I've exposed them at 40 seconds, f2, ISO 3.2, and you can see the Milky Ways there in place where we want to put the tracked version, and it should line up perfectly and easily. The blend should not be a problem. So I'll just show you what this image looked like. The raw was basically like that, and I'll just take you step by step what I did. The first thing I will begin with is custom white balance. Now you're free to go cold, warm, whatever you want. And I go a little bit cold there. I don't want it too green, so I might leave it like that. And I might raise the shadows, not too much, but slightly, something like that. I won't touch, I could touch the highlights, I'll leave them. Anyway, for the foreground, it's really basically just a bit of white balance, changing, raising the shadows. I've already exposed long enough at a high ISO, 3, 2 and 40 seconds, so the shadows are more revealed. And I've basically done 5 images so I can stack them and do some noise reduction. So we'll go to the previous image because I'm happy with how I've done that here. And copy. Normally what I do is I process an image. I do the basic settings on Lightroom for the white balance, the shadows, and that's it. I haven't touched anything more. And basically I'll just copy those settings and paste them to all 5 images like that. Develop settings, paste, and then we edit in and open as layers in Photoshop. It'll just take a minute, but they will open up. And here they go. Now normally if your tripod is very stable and you haven't jogged it off or made any movements, then stacking this should be no problem. But however, sometimes if you're using a heavy lens or you didn't tighten up your ball head tight enough, it can be that the camera slightly moves. It might move in between images or during images, so I tend to go through the images and just check. I zoom in and go through each layer just to see if anything looks off. For me that looks pretty good. If you look on the last one there, it looks like it's slightly moved, which will be a problem. So I do have another little trick that you can use, and basically I select all the layers and go to edit and I press auto align layers, and I leave leave the projection on auto, and hit OK. Might take a minute or two. Alright, and you can see on the edges there's some, that's where it's overlapped the images, and then obviously some parts are missing. And then what I will do is, keeping them all selected, is convert to Smart Object. Alright, that's done now. So the next part is to go into Layer, Smart Object, Stack Mode, and Mean, Median. I'll go with Mean, and then hit OK. Now I can zoom in, and I'll just hit undo so you can see the difference. Undo, you can see the noise, and then redo. Again, undo, we see the noise, and now after stacking, we've removed a bit of noise. Now I'll just flatten this layer, or rasterize layer. And then the next thing I'll do is, I will actually do another noise reduction. Do that, just copy the layer, we go into filter, noise, dust and scratches, and if we move, you can see a part of the image, okay, and if you can see, like that is creating more noise, and the lower we go, it's removing noise. And you can play around with the radius and threshold and see what works out best for you. I'm going to leave it at that. That looks good, and I'll press OK. And now if we zoom in on the image, I'll just disable that layer and we can see the one before it. It's not a huge difference, but it's done something slightly. And what you can do is, if you haven't stacked images and you just have a single image, you can always do that and it may remove some noise. And then the next thing I'll do is copy that layer, and now on this layer I'm gonna do, this is a little trick I've learned, and it doesn't always work, but sometimes it makes the foreground pop. Now I change that view mode to overlay on this layer, and then I go up to filter, other, high pass. You can also mess around with this, so I've found this number 44 works pretty well, and I hit OK, and we can just zoom in as well, something like that, and we turn it off and we turn it on, kind of makes the foreground pop a bit more. And self preference, you might like it like that, it looks kind of smooth, and with that it's kind of like you turn the clarity on or something. And you can always reduce the opacity, increase or decrease to however you decide that you like it. And I'll probably leave it somewhere like that. And then what I'll do is select all these layers and merge them. And that's it, that's my foreground layer ready. And you can name that foreground. And the next part I will do is increase the canvas size. Probably something like that, because we need room afterwards to put the sky in place. Now there's two ways of doing a blend for the sky. Now if you got the latest version of Adobe Photoshop, then you can actually just go edit and click hit sky replacement, and that's quite a neat little trick. But the other method is you basically use this tool, quick selection, and hit that, and then just doesn't always do a great job. The minus, remove that part, and just going to do this roughly, but you can go into select and mask, and then you can zoom in and like refine this. You got the refine edge brush tool. Sometimes it does good. You do like that, removes a bit, kind of goes around, masks around the trees. Sometimes it does a good job and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you might have to do it completely manually and basically draw this brush. And you see I'm drawing over the house there, so you'd have to decrease the size and then hit minus and remove them, which it can be time consuming. And there are a few other ways to do this, but back when I wasn't using the sky replacement tool, I was doing it like that, and it took sometimes hours when I had a lot of trees in that. And then you hit OK, and you got your selection, and basically you hit vector mask, and you want to invert that, and your foreground's there ready. And then you can just, I'll just give you an example. I'll copy this sky from here for the minute. We go back in, let's just say we paste the sky there, and we put it under there, and then we move it up. And so we still got the mountains there, the horizon from the sky images, and kind of tells me where I need to place my sky. Because we want it as realistic as possible. And it would go something like that. But for now we're going to remove that, because we're going to process the sky. So go back over to Lightroom, and we go to our sky images. I've done the same here. I've done white balance adjustment. Here's the first one. We can see step by step what I've done here, and I've done a custom white balance, and then I've played around, I've turned up the saturation and vibrance completely, something like this for example, and I basically just did that to kind of try and balance out, to make the image as neutral as possible. And I did something like that for example, and then I decreased the vibrance and saturation, and then I'm left with a kind of neutral looking image. It's not too blue, it's not too purple. I mean, you can, if you want, you can go blue, you can go purple, but what I've chosen to do is go for something like that. Go for neutral, because when I will process it in Photoshop and do some curves and that on it, the saturation will increase, and I will do a final white balance. And it's like color grading on it over there, and yeah, literally that's all I've done is just a white balance. I mean, you can, if you want a really saturated image, you can increase it from now. You can add some contrast, increase highlights, decrease, but I don't really touch any of that. I used to touch the contrast a bit. I used to lower the highlights if I've exposed my sky image really long and it's quite bright by the horizon. But here was a dark sky, so don't have a blown out horizon. And then same also, once I've got the white balance that I like, or whatever settings you decide to use, you then select all the images, copy paste the settings, and then open them as layers in Photoshop. Again, we're going to have to wait. It's not always that fast. And then once my layers are opened up here on Photoshop, the first step is to stack them. Now, I'm not going to waste too much time today. I will just give you a rough example of how I stack my images. We don't have too many artifacts like planes or satellites in my images, luckily. So you've got some movement there. The first image is kind of way off, so I probably will scrap that image and remove it out for today. So going through them, it looks all good. It doesn't look like we have any planes or satellites in them, but I'll just give you an example. Let's imagine you've got an artifact in your image and you don't want that artifact there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw an artifact, because I used a brush and I just draw a line. And we're imagining that this is a satellite or a plane in our image, and we don't want that in. And when we do manual stacking in Photoshop, it may remove them faintly, but it will not remove them completely. And in the previous images, there we have just found one now. Turning off the layer, on and off, we can see there is a satellite, or looks like a plane trail. So how would I mask that out? I would basically make a vector mask and then change it to black and remove the artifact, and now it's gone. And the same on the next layer. Add a vector mask. You may want to decrease the size and mask that out. And then when I stack the images, it won't be there. So then the next part is turn off all the layers, the ones on top of the first layer, and zoom in somewhere roughly in the middle of the image, the stars, and you turn on the next layer and you press lighten. Now if I turn that on and off, we can check if there's any movement with the stars. And that looks clean, that looks good. And the same, we turn on the next one, we press lighten, And now we can see there's some slight movement, and what we need to do is align them with each other. So I hit Command T, and with the arrow keys on the keyboard, you can just go up and down ever so slightly until you get that aligned. And something like that looks good. If we turn on and off, that looks a lot better now. And again, we turn on the next one, hit Lightroom, turn it on and off. And there's still some slight movement, so again, hit Command T. And that will do it. It's not perfect. You can perfect it, get it as aligned as possible and as sharp as possible. And then we do the same. We select all the layers and we convert them to Smart Object. And then afterwards we will be able to stack that, just like we stacked the foreground. Now with the foreground we press the auto align, and that works great with foreground, but if you want to press auto align with the sky, you can give it a go. But if you've got some foreground in the image, it might try to align all the foregrounds from the images and not actually the sky, and it's a lot less reliable than doing it manually. In fact, I've never done it myself. So yeah, stacking is maybe the boring stuff, takes some time, but once it's done then we will get into the fun stuff of actually playing around with the image a bit. So I've converted it to a smart object, and the next step is smart object, stack mode, and I'll go hit mean. And what we'll do is, again, zoom in, I'll hit undo, and then I'll hit redo, and you can tell me if you see a difference. Ever so faintly, because we've only stacked 4 images, but it has done something. It has ever so slightly removed some noise. And then again, rasterize this layer. And then I'll make a copy of this layer. And what I'll do with this now is I'll do a star reduction. Now, obviously we are taking images of the stars and the Milky Way, and we are trying to capture stars. So one would ask, why do we want to remove stars? Well, a lot of people ask me, how is it I'm making my Milky Way stand out, or the highlights of the sky? And well, I'm using star reduction, because the fainter stars here and around there, I'm not really interested in them. I'm interested in the galactic core, the horse and row, and this faint red nebula up here. So I'll go to select, color range, select the highlights, and you can play around with the fuzziness, see what works best for you. Might have to decrease it. something like that. I'll just say we hit OK, and then select, modify, expand. You can expand by 1 pixel. Select, modify, feather by half a pixel, and then filter, other, minimum, and 0.4, and hit OK. And then press deselect. Turn it on and off, and then we can see what happened. And before it was like this, and then after like that, and it will also make the brighter stars. Let's look, for example, here are some bright stars. It did make them slightly smaller, but mostly it removed all these fainter stars. Not removed them completely, but the Milky Way like that stands out more. And you can also change the opacity if you don't want to do it too much, something like that, for example. And then the next thing is we begin with a curves layer. And I'll lower the darks, raise the highlights. And you can do another curve layer on top if you want. It's probably going to be way too, bright now. You can decrease the opacity. Basically, this is where I play around. I use curve layers after I've done my star reduction. And this is the part where you shouldn't copy me. You should do what you like best, and how you can. This is how you can create your image how you want it to look. So I would use these curves layers. I may add some contrast if I need contrast. A lot of people are using these tools, dodge and burn. I'll just give you an example with dodge. We'd like do the highlights, and you can just like brush over them. First of all, I'll do is this. Is all copy everything to one layer, and then I can show you it's a lot easier. So we're using the dodge, and you could like increase the highlights here. I'm going to go extreme just so you get the idea. And you can make that pop there, maybe a bit here, even here and there, and before and after. I don't use this tool anymore, but it's there if you want to use it. And you can always burn. We burn the shadows. And then we can give some more contrast in here, and there, around here. Before, after. I didn't use that myself. I think it's a bit extreme, but it's there if you want to use it. And then other than that, I play around with the hue and saturation. If I want a part of the Milky Way for the color to pop out more. and I'll do a final color balance. You know, it's looking a bit purple, it's looking maybe a bit blue, you could go a bit yellow, you could go slightly green, and red, or like there's too green. I'm just going to do a rough, you know, before, after. It's slightly yellow, so for example, we do a hue and saturation, we select the yellows, and we could, you know, if you had a really light polluted sky and it was like, imagine like super yellow, the horizon, because sometimes that happens in light polluted places, you could actually use this tool and decrease and kind of remove, you know, imagine a light polluted place and you could decrease a bit of the light pollution and you get some more contrast, ever so slightly a bit of contrast down by the horizon. And right now I've not touched that, but you know, if my image is looking too yellow, I could remove some of that yellow, but you remove too much and you know, you're removing it from the whole image. You could always mask, you know, add a vector mask and brush in parts of the sky that you want, saturated in whichever color. I'll give you an example. If there's actually some red up here, but it's not showing, so we could, you know, change the hue a bit. Just it's turning out purple, but there is actually a nebula up here that's red. It's not showing too well in this image, but you know, normally if I catch it well, then I could increase the reds here. And then, for example, I could, you know, let's imagine there's that red nebula here. I could basically mask it in and then decrease the opacity until it, you know, didn't have such a harsh contrast and suited the image, but I'm going to remove that for now. So let's imagine we finished and we're happy with our sky image, and still need to remove that, you know, without the dodge and burn and with. Looks kind of nice. Normally I'd spend some more time playing around on my image till I perfect it and I'm happy with it. And I mean, that is the image here on the left. Is I went for these colours. It's kind of yellow, but it's like warm at the horizon and cold at the top, and there's kind of a gradient, but I like how it looks, and that is what I went for. And right now we've got our sky, and I'll actually merge everything into one layer, and I'll Command C and copy that layer, and we go back over into our foreground image. We want to paste that there, and we want to put that underneath, and then we want to move it into place. And as you can see, the mountains line up. We bring that image down. We might have to hit Command T, turn the image slightly, because remember we're tracking, and I was tracking the image, and the sky has, you know, the camera is turned with the sky. And in the end I might have to crop off those, you know, those bits, but like that it lines up, you know, slightly better. And the next part I would do is, you know, I would zoom in, and yeah, we have some part of the image where it's not overlapping correct, and that is due to the mask, and you will have to draw back in sky, like that. Now if I draw too much, you can see I removed the foreground, so you will have to decrease the brush size and draw it in perfectly, but like that is not perfect. I'm not going to waste time right now and show you, but you get the idea. You might want to go around your trees. If you've got a white line, a slight white line here, I might slightly mask that out. But you get the idea of where I'm going, and without and with. That's how it's done. And if in your horizon, for example, the mountains are maybe too bright along the edge, then you could use that burn tool. And with that burn tool, keep the exposure real low, anything under 10%, don't go too high. And I'm going to just keep drawing. You can see it's getting dark like that. You don't want it that dark, but you get the idea of how we use the tool, and you could slowly, darken the horizon a bit. Something like that, for example, and you go without, and you go again with. I don't know if you can notice the difference, but it looks more natural like that. Yeah, and then the last thing would be is, check, maybe your foreground, the white balance is off from the sky. I'll just give you an example. Let's imagine that the foreground was too purple, or just slightly purple, and it was not matching the sky. So obviously you would open the color balance and select this here, so that it just selects the foreground, and then we would play around until we're happy with it. But I did a good job before, and I'm happy with that. The foreground looks neutral. The sky is saturated, but I think it looks neutral too. And I could make the foreground slightly warmer, tiny bit, and if we turn that on and off, it kind of looked a bit cold before, and now it looks slightly warm. Maybe that blends even better. And yeah, so that is how I do it. If we go, that's the image I went for. That is the colors I wanted to get. And right now we just did this, and that also looks pretty good. And for me, that was a quick edit. I didn't spend too much time on that, and it's really different. It's up to yourself what you choose to use. If you want to play with the dodge and burn tools, if you want to add contrast, which white balance, the color balance, what you want to go for. If you want to do the high pass tool that I did to kind of make the foreground pop, and you can also even try that on the sky. And I'll just show you. For example, I'll copy the sky, and again change the view to overlay. We don't want the sky like that, and then we go filter other high pass, and again you use the same number I used, or try what looks best for you. Press OK, and off, on. Here you can see the star reduction. The sky kind of looks smooth, and like that. It's kind of like you turned it back on again. It does create a bit of detail, but it does make it look in a way kind of noisy and grainy. And I went for that in this image. I was just testing out, some new ways to process and play around with my images. But on this image, I would probably turn that off, or I would decrease the opacity, something like that. And, And then I would crop the image, and I've cropped that image like that, and then export it, and that's it. So I hope that tutorial was helpful. I hope that you could understand everything I was doing. If you have any questions, or there are things you didn't understand, or you need me to guide you through some steps, then please drop a comment or send me a message on Instagram, or you can visit my website and then send me an email. I am set up on Patreon, so and what I'm doing on Patreon is I'm offering my patrons basically free images to process, and I'm giving homework out every month, and then you can take my images and try to process them exactly like me with the guides that I'm creating and I've created till now. And yeah, I recommend going over and visiting if you're interested in that. And yeah, if you liked the tutorial, please do share it. Please give me a thumbs up, and I'll be happy if you follow me too on YouTube. Yeah, and thank you for watching. I wish everyone clear skies.